Greetings and welcome to Preparing for the Cascade of Federal Funding, Catch the Wave. You are in good company. We've had over 1,000 registrants from people all over the country, spotlighting the need for timely information on how the federal stimulus packages will impact and direct our economic recovery. This is Jean Hammerman, the Deputy Director with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, also known as CCLEAR. First and foremost, we hope you, your families, and communities are well and you all stay healthy. Our lives have been upended these last few months as we strive nationally and locally to respond to the health and economic fallout of COVID-19. We organized this webinar to put a land reuse focus on the CARES Act and to spotlight current and anticipated federal funding and capital market opportunities that support the reuse of contaminated and underutilized properties in ways that build community assets and creates jobs. We have three nationally renowned speakers who will share their perspectives on what's happening at the EPA's Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization, what's in the Federal CARES Act, and how to plan now for forthcoming federal funding to revitalize your community through infrastructure, transit, water projects, and more. Slides were being changed as late as today as the federal response remains fluid and uncertain. Before we start, I'm going to spend a moment introducing you to CCLEAR and going over some housekeeping rules. The Center for Creative Land Recycling is the leading national not-for-profit championing reuse of equitable and sustainable land reuse. This means converting abandoned or vacant commercial and industrial properties to assets that benefit the community, create jobs and tax revenues, and builds resilience. We support transformations by educating and convening communities, government agencies, and the private sector to create optimal conditions for reinvestment. We are EPA's technical assistance to brownfield community provider for 10 states and territories around the country. Please take a moment to follow us on social media to get the latest information about grants and upcoming webinars. CCLEAR delivers a range of educational, grant review, and technical assistance services that brings millions of dollars into into communities and trains thousands of land reuse practitioners each year. If you want to learn more about, seems to have a mind of their own, my slides. If you want to learn more about our services and how we can assist your community, please complete the questionnaire in the survey that will launch immediately following the webinar, and we will be in touch with you. Next slide, please. We heartily thank the American Planning Association, Upstate New York chapter for accrediting this webinar. Those of you who are AICP certified planners can receive one certification. Sorry, they're just going by themselves. One certification maintenance credit. Please note the number and report these credits as you would for live events. We heartily thank, I'd like to give a shout out to BCA Environmental Consultants, a broad-based environmental consulting firm, for their support of CCLEAR's educational programming. Next slide. The speakers will be using PowerPoints as they present. They will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some structured discussion. Yes, the webinar will be recorded, and you will get a link to the recording after the webinar. Next slide. You can ask questions during the webinar. To do so, type your questions into the lower box of your dashboard. Send to all participants for everyone to see, or to send to moderators only. We may not be able to answer all your questions today. Following the webinar, we will group question types, research answers, and send a Q&A compilation to all registrants. So watch for that. We also have several handouts, so look in the handout section for the materials that are listed here on the slide. Next slide. If we're interrupted or if you have trouble connecting, please look at the technical difficulties and audio document that is also in your dashboard. Check your chat box or email for further instructions. If the visuals are interrupted but video remains functional, you can download the presentation and continue to listen. We have inserted 2 poll questions to get insights from you about conditions on the ground as it relates to redevelopment projects. The first question is, in this COVID-19 environment, how are your redevelopment projects generally being impacted? Please choose the one answer that best fits where you are. Minimally, as we're moving projects about the same pace, somewhat redevelopment projects are slumping now, but we expect them to resume as planned shortly. Greatly, resources needed for redevelopment are being reallocated to essential services and projects are on hold. This question is really important and interesting. We're hearing a lot significant regional and project variations, and so we're looking forward to getting your results. So this portrays a fairly optimistic response in that 70% indicated they're slowed, but they expect to resume. Excellent. The second poll question is, in what ways could COVID-19 change the way you do community revitalization? And in this, you can choose all that apply. We will move more of our community engagement and communications online. We will be more cautious about end use, maybe shifting away from hospitality or other large gathering facilities. Or we're more likely to need assistance navigating funding to fill budget gaps in our, or we expect to resume our practices with minor changes. On both of these questions, we'd love to learn more from you. So please share additional information in the comments section of the survey that will be launched after the webinar. So let's see what you have indicated. So I see that they'll be moving more online, less reuse of consideration of end use options, assistance needing navigating with the funding, and resume as natural with minor changes. Excellent. Next slide. It is now my pleasure to introduce the panelists in the order in which they will speak. First, we will hear from David Lloyd. David has been the director of the Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization since 2016. Prior to joining EPA, he held a variety of positions in the areas of private and government legal practice, real estate operations, and development. David will be followed by Toby Rittner, Executive Director of the Council for Development Finance Agencies, CDFA, which is a national association dedicated to the advancement of development finance and represents hundreds of public and private nonprofit entities. Toby is a recognized leader in the development finance industry and has advised state and federal government leaders. Finally, we'll hear from Matt Ward, CEO and co-founder of Sustainable Strategies, a government affairs and strategic consulting firm helping communities obtain resources for revitalization. Matt has extensive experience in economic and infrastructure development, sustainability, federal and state government affairs, and resource strategies and advocacy. It is now my pleasure to turn the presentation over to David.
Jean, thank you. And please speak up if you can't hear me. But thank you very much, first of all, to CClear for hosting this. Just so all of you on the webinar know, CClear is a longtime collaborator with my office. They're one of our technical assistance providers, as is Toby Rittner's organization, and also Matt Ward has done extensive support to our program. We rely on him for a lot of specialized outreach, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel with this group of people. I've actually been had the privilege of being in this job since 2006. And I tell friends that I'm not leaving until they make me. So hopefully I'll be around for a few more years. But I want to give you just some updates on funding opportunities from the program that I have the privilege of working in. In the grants arena, we recently announced the fiscal year 20 round of brownfield grants. That was last week. And we were so thrilled with the rollout. We selected 151 communities and tribes, and they will receive 155 grants totaling over 65 million. 104 assessment grants, 12 revolving loan fund grants, and 39 cleanup grants. Very exciting. Congress and this administration has continued to realize the value of this program. And so our appropriations in these difficult times have held steady, and we're thrilled with that. We plan on having a multi-purpose assessment and cleanup competition coming up in the next round. And in this next round, which we'll announce late in the summer, I think, the guidelines will be out. We'll have assessment, which assessment grants up to $300,000 for community-wide, or $350 for site-specific, and $600,000 for assessment coalitions to conduct site assessments at brownfield sites. And some of these funds can also be used for planning activities at one or more brownfield sites, which builds off of our area-wide planning efforts that we had in years past. Our cleanup grant in the next round will be up to $500,000. And this is all as a result of the Build Act amendments. And I know many of the people on this call, stakeholders on this call, supported the Build Act implementation passage, and we thank you for that. It's really heartening that in these difficult times that we got increased authority, and that's nothing to sneeze at. It's a big deal, and we're thrilled. We'll also have a multi-purpose grant, which is basically a planning grant, and that will authorize up to $800,000 for assessment, cleanup, and planning activities. We'll want to require that the recipients do assessment and cleanup, actual assessment and cleanup, but also they'll have that ability to do some planning, which is critical. And then not lastly, revolving loan fund. We're going to continue that. We recently concluded a round in just now in fiscal year 20. We're going to have a supplemental round in 21, as we always do, for high performing RLFs. They can come in and ask for more money, and we don't have to do that through any sort of strict competition. We can allocate additional funds, and we do our best to isolate funds for that, because these are grants, high performing revolving loan fund grants, just for example, like the state of Wisconsin, that do amazing work, and being able to give them additional money is just wonderful, because they have projects lined up and waiting. And then lastly, we will release guidelines in the summer of 2020 for our environmental workforce development and job training grant. And those of you who've had these or are familiar with these know they're so impactful. They're not huge dollar, they're only $200,000, but the impact on communities, particularly disadvantaged communities, is amazing. And we get so much good news out of this. So that's our grant outlook, our grant funding outlook. Also, though, we provide, and the statute provides, liability protection. And honestly, those of you who know brownfields well like Matt know that the liability protections, that was the engine behind the growth of this program on the federal and state level. It gave people confidence that they can buy these contaminated sites and not subject themselves to excessive liability, or at least allow them to know what their liability is, which you can always bind around that. And you know, if you know your risk, lenders will lend you money as long as they know what the risk is. So we have great support from the Office of Enforcement, and we have tools which in the materials you can link into them, which give you information about potential liability associated with brownfield sites, and also the liability protections and the tools and the steps you need to take through doing appropriate inquiry, all appropriate inquiry. Someone's typing, could you mute, please? Mute, please. Everybody mute, thank you. The all appropriate inquiry rule, which Patricia Overmeyer, who's the deputy in the program, she basically developed that rule and got it through the process of negotiated rulemaking. That is a tremendous tool to shield liability. So make sure you're familiar with that. On our website, we have great information on that. So make sure you're familiar with that. As a brownfield practitioner, you need to know that rule in detail, and it's not complicated. Lastly, in terms of program areas, state and tribal response programs. My favorite part of the brownfields program is the state and tribal response program 128A, because we're able to give funding, approximately 50 million a year. We're authorized at 50 million, and we usually get close to that amount, to give states and tribes the resources they need to develop response programs. Because unlike Superfund, unlike RCRA, and largely unlike, well, not like tanks, unlike Superfund and RCRA, the states and tribes oversee these cleanups, not my program. The program that I run is a funding and technical assistance program. It's not like Superfund, where the federal government is actually overseeing the cleanup. Rather, the states and tribes oversee these brownfield cleanups. And as many of you know, the states and tribes increasingly are developing their own brownfields programs, which is really exciting because it's getting so much more traction on the ground and getting that much more money out there. I just have a couple more points, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I wanted to let you know, people have asked me on a lot of calls, what are the impacts of COVID-19 on the brownfields program? And there is no standard impact. It's based on what's going on in the local jurisdiction. But I will say this, and I'm confident in saying this, there is no doubt that there will be probably a slowdown in the pace of assessment and cleanup activity, because those have to be overseen by state and local governments, and state governments, yeah. And many are paused, as you know, many are working remotely. So we know we're going to see a slowdown. What isn't slowing down is our funding tools. We will have the money out, just like we did in 20, right on schedule. So we will have the money to those jurisdictions, and we'll have the technical assistance available. But we know that the work on the ground will likely be slowed somewhat. So we're cognizant of that. We continue to collaborate with what I would call the federal family of brownfield agencies. As many of you know, we have a federal partners guide, which is on our website, and we update it regularly. We just updated it last year in 2019. We do about every 2 years do an update, but that is an amazing resource for you as a community or as a brownfield practitioner, because it lists by agency what funding's available, what support's available for brownfield related cleanups and redevelopment. So I really encourage you to please look at that document. It's one that I'm very proud of. I think it's probably one of the most useful resources that we develop update every 2 years. The 2021 National Brownfields Training Conference is we're planning full speed ahead. It's on schedule to be in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in April 2021. Oklahoma City has been a tremendous leader in brownfields redevelopment in the Midwest and nationally, actually. They have done some amazing things in the brownfields world, and we're very proud to be going there. As you recall, we were just last in Los Angeles, but Oklahoma City, the planning committee, my deputy, Patricia, who isn't on the call today, she's on another call, she is the organizer, and she said that the planning committee is just so enthusiastic. So I think we're going to have a really great conference. Please look, go online to brownfields2021.org and look at the registration information, etc. And please plan to come because we want to see everybody. I just want to say a couple of things quickly, and I'm done almost. I'm hopefully not running over my time, Gene. As of February 2020, almost 32,000 properties have been assessed with federal brownfields funding. 93,000 acres of idle land has been made ready for productive reuse. Over 160,000 jobs created, and over $31 billion of public and private funding has been leveraged. That is with the federal funding. That doesn't even begin to count the state and tribal brownfields funding. So this is a tremendous economic booster, this program. And those of you there who are on the call know that, and thank you for your support of that. We're making investments in communities, and we're helping to promote jobs, but we're also helping to leverage redevelopment and growth and improve environmental health. And that's so important. Public health and environmental health. We find our results find that when brownfield sites are addressed, nearby property values within a mile radius increase by 5 to 15%. And when we have a cleanup, that property values can increase within a 1 mile radius by up to $1.5 million. So it's a very, it has a huge impact on property value. And the next stat I want to tell you is really valuable to us, and we always brag about it to the Hill because we want them to see the value. And then we did a study a couple of years ago analyzing a handful of brownfield sites, about 50 brownfield sites, and we realized that an estimated $29 to $97 million in additional tax revenue were generated for local governments in 1 year due to the brownfields cleanup. So this is 2 to 7 times more than the $12 million that EPA contributes to the cleanup of those brownfields. So it's tremendous for local governments in terms of their revenues. We've seen visible improvements in communities from the funding we've awarded. As I said, as of February 2019, 30,000 properties have been assessed. 70,000 acres of idle land has been made ready for reuse. And as I said a moment ago, $25 billion of public and private leveraging has occurred. We are really excited about that. The last stat I'll give you, which I love to say, is that for every $1 of brownfields money spent, $16 is leveraged. 8.5 jobs are created per $100,000 of grant funds. So we're talking dollars leveraged and jobs leveraged, and we're very proud of that. So anyway, I don't want to brag anymore about the great success of the program. I want to thank you all for your contribution to it. And Gene, thank you for having this webinar, and I'll turn it over now to my colleagues. And I can't remember which one's going first, either Matt Ward or Toby Rittner. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. I hope I'm unmuted and everything is working. Someone can tell me otherwise if it's not working. Just wanted to say thank you to C. Claire and to David and Matt for joining me on today's webcast. I'm going to try to work through my material pretty quickly. Wanted to just give you a couple of caveats here. I have 3 children that are outside in the backyard right now, trying their best to be respectful to Dad being on a webcast, but as you can imagine, I may have to run out there and adjudicate a battle at some point, but do my best to stay focused and on here. I'm coming to you from Columbus, Ohio, and we're excited to give you a real quick presentation. I'm with a group called the Council of Development Finance Agencies, and we focus on development finance for state and local government as it relates to the built environment, infrastructure, small business, and entrepreneurs. We cover everything from bonds, TIFs, tax credits, and revolving loan funds to opportunity zones, EB5, and everything in between. Today, I'm going to try to keep it, see, as I speak, here comes one of them. Today, I'm going to try to keep it a little higher level at the beginning because I was interested by the poll numbers that you all had earlier about your impact that COVID's having on some of your projects. And I may provide you a little bit of rain on your parade because we do think that it's more of a serious situation than a lot of communities are anticipating. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the CARES Act, some challenges facing communities, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some resources at your fingertips. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the CARES Act. I almost feel like this is outdated, but CARES Act was passed several weeks ago. There has been an amendment, a supplemental to the CARES Act, $2+ trillion of total relief. It's probably higher than that at this point. Maybe it's $2.5 trillion because of the supplementals. So really the focus that we're not going to go into in depth here on all this. We'll give you some detail, but really what we want to talk about is how those resources are transcending the situation around the country. There's payments going to individuals that are helping everyday people sort of get through some of the crisis. There's a significant amount of money going to state and local government. Small businesses are getting a huge portion of this through the PPP program. Big corporations were also provided some relief to help them stay afloat, and then public health received a lot. All in all, what you've seen out of the last, 3 stimulus bills and what we're going to talk about today with perhaps the next bill is the largest federal outlay of resources for development and economic development that we've ever seen. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the PPP program. Really proud to say they're still taking applications. So to the extent that you're working with any borrowers in your community that are looking to support their small business needs, there's about $700 billion available for PPP. The first round went really fast in 2 weeks. The third round's been out now 2 weeks, and we still haven't used all of that money. There's all sorts of rules with PPP. Most important is that they can be forgivable. Some portions or all of these loans can be forgivable based on head count and maintaining your staff at your companies. We want people to check this out and just be aware that PPP is still open, and go through your lenders and your local SBA offices to learn about those things. Next slide, please. Now, there was some other relief given to the SBA, like the EIDL loans, which is a working capital loan, where a portion of that is forgiven. Obviously, SBA is doing debt relief with their 7A and 504 programs for the next several months. They're paying interest and fees, so keep in mind that you might have some existing loans and outstanding loans and things that you can work around with those existing programs. And then obviously there's some bridge loan financing programs that are out there that can be used and are kind of bridging the gaps between when you get approved for maybe an EIDL loan or a triple P loan. So keep it in mind that you want to get different phases of the development landscape. Next slide, please. Also, obviously, there's a lot going to individuals. Individuals are getting checks depending on their relative status. We're also seeing there's the employee retention tax credit, which is helping employers to maintain employees and giving them tax credits. We've moved the federal filing date for taxes back to July 15. And then obviously we've created what's called a municipal liquidity facility. And this is a facility where communities can go to help get relief from some of their debt needs. I'm going to just pause this really quick. Just had to tell my son to go outside. All right, next slide, please. All right, let's try to get to the good stuff. So for those of you who are looking to find out where the resources are, and these are probably the questions I get every single day, the USDA got 34 billion in different types of resources. Rural development got a lot, 145 million. And we want people to look out for these, because if you're doing projects, it might be through rural business grants and loans programs. It could be through other types of programs. It might be seeding or revolving loan fund through the IRP program. Really understanding that USDA got a lot of money. But the one that I think everybody here is, the two that I think everybody here is probably most interested in is learning about EDA. EDA got $1.5 billion, and their notice of funding availability went out about a week ago. And it's a really liberal notice allowing communities to apply for grants through the EDA for a variety of activities. I really want to make clear, like if you get off the phone here today and you want to talk to someone, I'm telling you, give Matt a call or his team, because you really should understand that this is an open funding opportunity right now for $1.5 billion for people to get a share. So if you're working on a project and perhaps it's stalled, or you need capital to get through some phases, it's really critical to know that this one is available right this second. And I want to make sure everybody knows that the EDA supplemental is available right now for people to apply. The other one is HUD. About $5 billion went to Community Development Block Grant. Now you might be saying, I'm not a Community Development Block Grant recipient. That's fine. But states and locals who are entitlement are going to get their portions, and they're going to be in the planning process of figuring out how to put that to work in their communities. To the extent that you have a project that needs capital, or that's looking at capital for redevelopment or continue in the process, you may want to get in front of your CDBG lenders at the state or the county or the city level, depending on who's in control, and get them involved in your project and get into the pipeline. Next slide, please. These are just some more examples of other resources that have been applied. I'm not going to go into too much detail in these. Next slide. And I assume you all have the slides as a resource later on. All right, so I do want to talk about some challenges, and this is really where I want to get into the meat of my conversation. As the situation evolves, communities all around the country are facing major liquidity challenges, lots of job losses, 21 million people out of jobs, the highest unemployment rate we've seen since the Great Depression. And we are seeing project stagnation. Again, I don't want to rain on your parade, but I do want to put some realities into what's going on. We're having a call on Friday with our network, and we have 1,200 people coming on to decide to talk about what we're going to do with our bond issuers in the country. There's an enormous amount of outstanding debt out there. How are we going to pay that debt service when we don't have cash flows from taxes or other sources in our community? So we want to talk a little bit about how you can be thinking about this as it relates to your project and as it relates to your community. Next slide, please. So bond portfolios. Hopefully a lot of you on here know what a bond is. A bond is effectively a loan. These are loans that state and local government take out, and sometimes private individuals take out on behalf of a project through a state or local issuer. There are, quite literally thousands of bond portfolios throughout the country. There's anywhere from 15 to 20,000 tax-exempt bonds issued every single year, which means that lots of places have outstanding debt. So while you might be thinking about your project moving forward during this, you have to understand that a lot of communities already have debt service, or they're already strapped with a debt payment that they're trying to figure out right now. So we want you to think a little bit about what a community might be going through. Next slide, please. One thing you want to look at is that communities that have outstanding bond portfolios are thinking about these obligations. Talking to their financial experts, looking at their debt service expectations, and preparing for what's going to happen. So think about this from a cash flow perspective. let's say a community relies on income tax to fund operations, and part of operations is paying debt service on outstanding debt that they have for roads, bridges, sewers, and the last redevelopment project they did. Well, if that sales tax or that income tax stream diminishes, which is what's happening right now all over the country, then how do they fund the debt service payments that they have coming up? It may not be a problem today, may not be a problem in 2 months, but is definitely going to be a problem around Christmas and in the new year, because we'll see those decreases in revenue streams have a cumulative effect. So general obligation bonds, they're backed by the community, which means they are pledging their full faith and credit of the community to pay back that debt. So we really have to look at that debt, and we have to understand how your project fits in as potential new funding or new financing or new support, with this caveat that they're trying to pay existing debt. It's a lot like you want to remodel your kitchen, and that's great, and that's probably a good idea for the value of your home, but you already owe a mortgage. So are you prepared to take out more debt to continue to invest, or are you going to stick steady and pay the mortgage? We think, getting financial advisors involved right away is important, looking at the markets and thinking about ways you might be able to refinance your debt. One thing that you can do right now in a community, if you're thinking about it, is, let's say you have a new project that you want to invest in, you may be able to refinance your debt by issuing bonds for new money that helps buy out the old money. There's a lot of laws around that, and some of it's prohibited under law. Well, you could do taxable bonds in that situation, which has right now the interest rates are very low. Next slide. The next pressure that's coming is on non-recourse bonds. These are bond obligations that are not the obligation of the issuer or the community, but the obligation of a private sector borrower, like a hospital or a nonprofit, a farmer, perhaps an airport, or some sort of a private enterprise that might have borrowed through an issuer. Now, this is, why am I talking about this? Because this is a paramount concern. If nobody's flying at the airport, then the airport's not receiving revenues from carriers. If hospitals are overwhelmed and spending all this money on healthcare to protect us from COVID and to address their patients, then they may not have resources to continue to pay debt service. And then worst off, think about all your nonprofits. Lots of nonprofits are bond financed, a lot of them, like tens of thousands of them in the US. Say you're a theater, a nonprofit theater company, and you were expecting spring revenues from the nice weather and the show that was, the company that was in town, you may have lost all that. And so you've got debt service to pay. And this is important because a lot of the private activity bonds that you're going to see in the world, these kind of bonds, conduit bonds, are the same types of bond debts that you all would be seeking if you wanted to do a TIF deal or an infrastructure deal. And so understanding what the pressures are on the community for their outstanding debt like this, while it's not the obligation of the city or the county, it still is outstanding debt that needs to be protected. And it's important because reputations matter right now. And so knowing where you line up in that process is important. Next slide, please. So if you have new deals in the pipeline, we're just simply saying understand the landscape. Don't halt new deals. Don't stop thinking about what you're working on, but understand that you may not be able to borrow right now in the capital markets for infrastructure, or your city may not. So there might not be an appetite. But keep in mind, interest rates are really low. In fact, they're nearly zero. And so there might be an opportunity for you to attract really affordable capital if your project has really good financials and bones. Next slide, please. I got to move a little faster here. I know I'm behind. The last thing is ratings. This is going to be something that everybody on this call and everybody around the country starts to hear about in the next 60, 80, 90 days. Ratings are going to start to be impacted as communities face the threat of missing debt service payments or potentially just the stress of debt service payments. They're going to make decisions, and the big decisions they're going to make is where they don't spend money, because the one thing cities do is they pay their debt. So they may decide that they're going to not be able to hire the next round of police officers from the academy. They may not be able to do some expansions they wanted to do on roads and bridges or sewers. You should expect that to come. Tomorrow I'm doing a call with about 60 city and county administrators, and they're extremely worried about how their debt service streams are going to be funded. So they're going to start making cuts in other areas. Next slide. The next area is tax increment finance portfolios. And I know a lot of you on this call probably are hoping to engage tax increment finance for your redevelopment project. It is probably the #1 tool when it comes to the post-cleanup development of a brownfield, right? You create the TIF district and you use incremental revenues to pay off the debt for the infrastructure and perhaps the cleanup. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in that world. Next slide, please. So there's thousands of TIF districts all over the country and a lot of existing obligations. And what that means is that right now, this crisis is underscoring how important regular monitoring of your existing TIF districts matters. We have been fielding questions from communities all over the country for the last 8 weeks about what happens when revenue streams begin to slow, which is happening. Here's an example. Branson, Missouri is highly predicated on sales tax revenue from its entertainment and tourist industry. Nobody's traveling to Branson right now. So what does that do to its revenue streams? This is what your projects have to think about. If you had a project that was reliant on density and a lot of use from people that were going to generate the tax revenues, you may have to look at it and say, that's not reality right now because we can't get a lot of people on a piece of property, plus those behaviors have changed, and so we're not going to get that kind of use. Imagine you're a TIF district with a baseball stadium or a hockey arena or a sports complex or large brand new theater development. You may not have those revenue streams. So what we're telling folks is to prepare for sort of the worst right now. Revisiting your collateral, your security, all of the elements in your existing deals to understand whether or not you have space to put more projects in. We want you to also to begin thinking about projections on real estate impacts. We are going to feel and see real estate impacts in the U.S. for the next 2 years because of this. And I know that sounds dire, but it's true. If you're a community that relies heavily on retail activity because that's your revenue stream, maybe sales tax, what are you doing right now if no one's going to your malls or your retail establishments? And that may not change for a while. I don't know about all of you, but I'm not going to the mall anytime soon. And I'm probably a lot like a lot of people. Next slide, please. Want to also mark that a prolonged shutdown is going to reduce tax revenues. We want to make sure that we understand what tax revenues are being hit. So if the project you're looking at was hoping to use sales tax revenues to drive some of the financing, or if it was going to use real estate tax revenues to drive some of the financings, you may have to reevaluate your pro forma. We're encouraging you to work with your development agencies and look out into the future about what the portfolios look like. If your project was on track to go this year, just being honest, you're probably looking at least a year before that project can really get back into the public finance queue. I know that sounds dire, but there's a lot of other elements in the way before that. Next slide, please. The last thing I'll say about this is if you are working on a big redevelopment project and it relies on or has a number of businesses in that district or in that project, got to go back to them and revisit all of them. They may not be coming the way you thought they were coming. So if you had the sort of cookie cutter where you have the big box and you have 7 or 8 smaller users, you might not have them all as tenants anymore. If you had something more boutique-y, like maybe a boutique hotel coming in with some small users, you may not have that at all. And so one thing we're saying is look back at your businesses within your project, within your district, if it's existing or if you're trying to work out a deal right now for a new project, and find out if your businesses are still committed. I've got dozens of friends that have not been able to work. I'm sure you all do too. Well, those all have impacts on the businesses within those districts or within what you're trying to do on a project. Next slide, please. The last thing I want to say is while it's counterintuitive during a crisis to think that you can't be successful, we want to make sure that you're being proactive. So it might seem like losing some businesses right now or businesses closing isn't a big deal, but when you look at the underlying economics, it really is. If you have major anchors in TIF districts, if your project has major anchors, we want you to be really aggressive about making sure you have those commitments, and I already kind of touched on this. Next slide, please. And then if you have stuff in the pipeline, we're encouraging folks to continue to push projects, just understanding that the pro forma and the financials are going to change. The resources that are coming from the federal government are the largest set of resources that we've ever seen. So on the one hand, it's kind of a doom and gloomy situation, but you might have some resource coming from the EDA and EPA and USDA and all these agencies that could help to solidify the financial position of your project. We think tax increment's going to be a big solution for recovery. So if you're thinking more long term, I'd start lining this stuff up now to figure out whether or not you can engage TIF in 18 months. You might be in the right spot in 18 months. So get your cleanup, get like David was saying, get all that in the pipeline and get that project ready to go for when the market does shift. Next slide. I'm just going to go through some resources quickly. This is our COVID Resource Center. It's one of the largest ones out there. We built it in a couple days, and it has literally thousands of resources. If you go and click on this link, you'll find that we have every state program dedicated to COVID, every alternative program dedicated to COVID. That's all financing. So from the private sector like Facebook and whoever else, all the way to what every state is doing, and then narrowed down to some major cities and small places that are doing work. So check that out. Next slide. We have produced, that's our resource center, so that's just a screenshot, and please check it out. If you go to those maps, you'll see. We have a newsletter if you want to understand what's going on in the development space on COVID. We have a newsletter that goes out every Tuesday, I think it is, with thousands of people reading it. You sign it up for free on the web. Next slide. And this is what I was talking about earlier, and I encourage you to all consider this. These are free weekly briefings. They're Fridays at 1 o'clock. They're an hour long. They have been amazing. We've had philanthropy, treasury, bond issuers, federal agencies, market participants, anybody that wants to understand what's happening in state and local development finance can come on these. We have thousands of people that join us every Friday. Like I said, it's free. This week we have 6 or 7 bond issuers coming on. It's going to be really good because you'll see the perspective of what a debt provider is looking at and how they're trying to help with their portfolios and communities. Next slide, please. So this is our organization, cdfa.net. We hope you'll consider checking out the website, follow us on social media and whatnot. Unfortunately, I have a hard stop at 3, but I'm going to stay on until then. And I just want to thank you all and C. Claire for having me. And now I'm going to pass it over to my friend Matt Ward, who is one of the best when it comes to this, and you're going to enjoy his presentation. Matt, all yours.
Thank you, Toby. It's good to be with everybody today. It's great to be with my friends and colleagues at C. Clear, Gene Hammerman, with David Lloyd of EPA, and with Toby Rittner as well. It's good to be with everybody out there. For those of you who have worked with me before, know I am not Grizzly Adams. This is Matt Ward, teleworking outside of Washington, D.C. in my virus response mode. Toby, my man, I'm with you. My wife and I actually have 11 children. Only 6 are living at home right now, locked out of this space right now. The other 5 are making dozens and dozens of calls to the unemployment office every day, sitting on hold a day, wondering when they can get back to work. I will say that I hope that all of you and your families are healthy and that your local communities remain strong and resilient in this time of great uncertainty and challenge. It's very difficult to know how to navigate this unprecedented situation in America. We lack certainty on the path of the virus health crisis. We lack confidence in the direction of the economy at this time, and we lack clarity on how government is going to rise to the moment, rise to this challenge to keep our communities moving forward and moving forward together. But one thing is certain is that there are tens of billions of dollars of federal resources being directed at the virus response and at the economic rebuilding that we have to do, coming from the Congress, coming from the federal government to respond to the virus, to maintain the economy, and to hopefully start to help local communities and states reemerge and rebuild in the coming weeks and months. But these federal resources are coming so fast when our capacities to manage the situation are already so strained that C-Clear and our other presenters decided to do this webcast today to help give you the certainty and the confidence and the clarity about how you can navigate these federal resources, how you as local government and state government leaders, economic development officials, brownfield and land revitalization champions can take this cascade of federal resources to move your communities forward. So in the next 10 minutes, I am going to talk about a tool that I call a resource roadmap that you can use to be able to confirm your local project priorities, your priority needs, match those needs to potential federal resources, and then secure those resources to be able to move your communities forward. So next slide, please. So the next slide as it comes up is really just an overview of what my remarks will be. First of all, regular federal programs that were appropriated in the FY 2020 congressional spending bill, they're still strong, they're still there, they're still moving. I'm working hard on USDOT build grants, the old Tiger grants, which are due Monday. Those were announced before the virus and they're still coming. We have the Opportunity Zone tool and billions of dollars of opportunity funds that are still there, are still available to provide equity investment in real estate and economic development deals. You put this all together with the virus response resources. Toby talked about a lot of them. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those. It equals billions, actually tens of billions of dollars in funding available for community revitalization. I'm going to touch on how Washington is very much in the throes of debating more stimulus. And as a representative of local government officials, I'm particularly interested in the critical issue of resources for local government and, frankly, state government, tribal government, territorial government. They're losing massive amounts of revenue, massive amounts of funding that are critically needed for operations, let alone economic development and community revitalization. That issue is being debated at this very moment, and everybody needs to be aware of what's going on. It might be a little bit over the horizon, but we are thinking about infrastructure investment and the role of a federal infrastructure bill in the coming months or year. And so I'll culminate these remarks with discussion about how you can best organize yourself to understand these resources and harness these resources using a tool that, again, I call a resource roadmap. So if you could hit the next slide, we'll get going. Okay, first, I recall that Mark Twain read his own obituary in a Baltimore newspaper, and he said, "The rumors of my death are premature." Well, now more than ever, federal resources, we're not worried about deficit spending at the moment. There are many, many federal resources that are out there. All of the agencies that normally give money for infrastructure and economic development and environmental sustainability, those resources are still there. There's new flexibilities being provided by agencies in many of those programs. And you can see, for example, DOT transportation grants. There's $1 billion that those grants are due Monday. It might be too late to start if you haven't started already. Toby mentioned USDA funding, HUD, CDBG, EDA, Appalachian Regional Commission, National Endowment for the Arts has announced a new round of their regular funding. It's going to be due in June and July. So there's still funding coming. Plus, as you saw in some of Toby's slides, and as folks certainly recognize, Congress is putting tens of billions of dollars more into these programs right now and creating new programs that can support your community revitalization. So there's a lot of funding out there. How do you navigate it? Next slide, please. Okay, I also want to mention that one of the most exciting and and game-changing economic development resources that came out was the tax bill of December 2017 contained the Opportunity Zone Act, which created about 8,500 Opportunity Zone census tracts, places that have been underinvested in for many years, places lacking capital, places that are very closely aligned with brownfields and blighted properties where we need to bring investment in. So these census tracts were created. There are federal government grants and resources that are being prioritized for these areas. The best news, if you're a brownfield or land revitalization practitioner, is that the final tranche of rules that the U.S. Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service, put out in December of 2019 were heavily influenced by David Lloyd and his team, who weighed in multiple times with Treasury to say, if we're going to invest in these low-income census tracts, we need to invest in brownfields and blighted areas. And we need to make sure that opportunity funds can be spent on brownfields. And the rules that ultimately came out were better than we ever expected in terms of investment of opportunity funds in brownfields. Without getting into fairly complicated tax rules, there's a test that you have to pass to be able to put money into an opportunity fund. You have to be creating what's called an original use, or you have to meet another test called a substantial improvement test. Treasury deemed that brownfield investment and revitalization is an original use automatically, and that removes a lot of the difficult timing tests and doubling of the basis of a property test or under that other test of substantial improvement. The original use test is going to be easy to meet for brownfields. Treasury clarified that money that goes into demolition and asbestos abatement and remediation of brownfields can qualify as eligible opportunity fund expenses. There are provisions for better timing using opportunity funds to take into account the regulatory approvals you may need to get from a state voluntary response program or other brownfield regulatory approvals. The rules for opportunity zones are good for brownfields. Now, I'll tell you that there was an expectation that there would be a much higher capital raise and a much faster clip of investment in opportunity zones, and the virus, as it has with many sectors of our economy, has put a bit of a wallop on that. We have uncertainty in real estate and economic development. As of April, the firm Novogradac, which is one of the leading voices on opportunity zones, said that there was about $10 billion raised in more than 400 different opportunity zone vehicles called opportunity funds. $10 billion is nothing to sneeze at, and that money is there, but it's a very uncertain atmosphere for investing in hotels and multifamily apartments and all the other things that that funding might have gone into. Treasury recognizes that and has delayed the period by which opportunity fund investors have to place their money into these real estate and economic development projects until July 15th. Due to the COVID emergency. Hopefully we're emerging as an economy by July 15th, but there's a lot of uncertainty as we talked about. Just to mention all those other tax tools that the US EPA Brownfields Office has recognized, that many of us as practitioners have put into brownfields and land revitalization, whether it be new market tax credits, historic rehabilitation tax credits, LIHTC, housing tax credits, they're all there. In various levels and through various vehicles as well. And so just as Toby said, now's no time to give up on your economic development plans. It's the same for putting these opportunity zone and other tax credits to use. I will tell you that the investment landscape, I don't need to tell anybody, it's very unclear right now for real estate and economic development. And so we're in uncharted waters. And whether tax credit investors are going to be investing in your projects means you're going to have a really strong project and really good plans and a good roadmap for getting there. So if we could move to the next slide. Going to look a little bit over the horizon at issues that are being debated today and are going to be debated in the coming days. You know, I represent a local government in Connecticut that has about $1.5 million of direct virus response expenditures that they've made to deal with the virus crisis. $1.5 million is a lot of money. They also have a $65 million hole in their coming year budget associated with the economic downturn, the loss of taxes and fees, and other things that keep cities running. Cities and states have to balance their budgets, and many of them are in massive multi-billion-dollar levels of trouble. So Washington and the CARES Act put $150 billion in what was called the Coronavirus Relief Fund, you know, $139 billion to local governments and states, you know, another $11 billion to tribes and territories, but put very restrictive provisions on them, saying that that city in Connecticut that has $1.5 million in virus funds, well, you can reimburse that, but you're not allowed to keep your government operating. You're not allowed to fill budget holes. You're not allowed to keep yourself whole and be able to move forward on economic revitalization and the other things that this nation really needs right now through very restrictive rules. I would encourage you to look at the guidelines issued on April 27th by the Treasury to see how you can use these funding. But what we really need is for Congress to fix the CARES Act provision to allow that $150 billion to fill the holes and move state and local governments forward. And it's undoubtedly going to be part of the debate in Washington about virus response and stimulus. And specifically, I'll talk on the next slide. Well, actually, I may have, you're fine with going to the next slide, but I will say that on the last slide, I missed a bullet that yesterday, the House of Representatives, the Democratic caucus, issued a new bill, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, that calls for nearly $1 trillion in local government and state government, tribal and territorial government economic relief to be able to keep cities and states and territories strong moving forward. And we think it's critical. So I'm going to talk just for a moment about HR 6800, the HEROES Act. It's a pretty good acronym: Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act. The HEROES Act in the House Democrats introduced a $3 trillion bill. And if you look at that top line, $3 trillion may be aspirational, or as one Republican senator said yesterday, it's dead on arrival before it was even issued or anybody ever read it. Somewhere between aspirational and dead on arrival, we have real issues, real sectors of the economy, including local, state, tribal, and territorial governments that need resources. And it's important to pay attention to what's in this and for everybody to be aware about what they should be advocating for as local leaders, as state leaders, to your congressional delegation and others, for what we need to get America rolling forward again and moving forward together. So without going into the details are 1,815 pages. The summary of this bill is 90 pages. So I have boiled it down to one slide that really highlights just land revitalization, economic development, infrastructure, community revitalization aspects that are in the bill, because that's what the topic of this webcast are. There's lots of other things in the bill, including for state and local governments, but you can see that there's nearly $1 trillion, $375 billion for local governments, $500 billion for state governments, $20 billion to tribes, $20 billion to territories, to keep these governments solvent and moving forward so they don't have the liquidity crises that Toby talked about, that would mean that the bond rating agencies aren't going to float your bonds, and that, you know, the revenue streams that you depend on to be able to keep things moving forward, you know, we need to shore that up in this economy. There's money in HUD CDBG, a longtime source of revitalization funding, including explicitly in the CDBG regulations for brownfield cleanup and revitalization. There's money for community development financial institutions. There's money for workforce training. There's money for broadband deployments. There's money to EPA to deal with environmental justice issues that the virus have brought. There's more than $30 billion that is marked for highway and transit investments. All of these are important. This is not law. This is an opening salvo and a debate about where we ought to be putting resources to keep the economy moving. And it's important that folks understand what's there. So that was introduced yesterday. We're going to be hearing a lot more about it, and somewhere we will hopefully get beyond dead on arrival in this virus crisis and start to talk about how to shore up the economy, including through the work that everybody on this webcast does. Okay, next. I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for $760 billion to go into infrastructure. Donald Trump said, no, let's go big. Let's go $2 trillion with infrastructure. Nancy Pelosi said, I agree with the president on this. There's a quick layout here of a bill that was actually introduced before the virus crisis really got as heavy as it is now, that gives you a kind of idea about where those kinds of infrastructure may be slated. There is $2.5 billion in that House approach for brownfields, for the EPA Office of Brownfields, for state brownfield response programs, for a new EPA Brightfield kind of renewable energy on brownfields program. So we have this introduced. If you go to the next slide, I'll just say, you know, the process of getting law passed in Washington, it stops and it goes. It's a debate, of course, and there are a lot of valid perspectives in this. The president called for $2 trillion, but now says we're not in so much of a rush. The Senate Majority Leader in the Senate has said flat out, we're spending too much, we're spending too fast, and we're not going to take these things up anytime soon. But meanwhile, at the end of this year, the main infrastructure bill in America, the FAST Act, which funds the Department of Transportation's highways, bridges, trails, rail, ports, infrastructure, it runs out, it expires at the end of 2020. Now, Congress often kind of band-aids it into the next year, but there is a reason for us to be looking at infrastructure. So if you go to the next slide, I talked about the normal programs that are well-funded and still rolling. Talked about all these supplemental monies that have come out in the CARES Act that are being debated in acts being introduced right now, while we also talk about the need for an infrastructure investment to get the country going. It's complicated, it's coming fast, it's a cascade of information. So what should you do? I'm going to close out my presentation by talking about using a resource roadmap to do this. Now, I recommend for all the clients, all the communities I work with, that a resource roadmap should be something you do every year, and you use it just like any map as you move along in your process of revitalizing and rebuilding your community on brownfields and in other ways. So it's a process by which you identify your community's real priorities, catalytic projects that just have been waiting to get done for too many years, projects that have a lot of support in the community or political support, but they're expensive to do. Revitalizing a dead steel mill on a waterfront, or revitalizing a rail corridor, or taking a dead section of downtown, or a blighted section of an opportunity zone, confirming those priorities, breaking those priorities into phases and components, discrete layers that you can identify you need to get done on a step-by-step basis to really eat that elephant one bite at a time, as I've often said about big, complicated, and expensive projects. You take those needs, projects, and priorities, which may be different for us in this post-virus world, when we realize we may not have the health infrastructure, we may not have the community broadband and connectivity infrastructure, we may not have our priorities as straight as we thought we did in light of the crisis that we're in the middle of in America right now. So confirm your priorities. And then you can match those to the available federal resources. This is, again, an exercise that I've done together with the EPA Brownfields office and with many of you out there many times, this resource roadmap. Well, again, the resources are different than they were 2 months ago. Our needs may be different. We need to prioritize, understand, and really confirm what our needs, projects, and priorities are, and match them against traditional resources and new resources. So a resource roadmap is an exercise. It's a process of bringing local community leaders, both inside and outside of government, economic development leaders, and putting down in writing, what are our real priorities? How do they break into different components? Is this a land revitalization project, a cleanup project, a stormwater control project, a bike and pedestrian trail project, a vertical development project, a Corps of Engineers project on the riverfront, a job training project? It's probably all of those in many of your brownfield and land revitalization projects. So how do you break those up into components, break those up into phases, and match them to resources? You will use this as a guide to budget. You know, what kind of budgeting do we need to put in our capital, local government capital, or economic development organizations capital plan for the coming 24 to 36 months? How are we going to find the matches to be able to match these federal resources? How can we leverage state and philanthropic and local financing resources against these grants that we want to apply for? Who do we need to talk to? Do we need to get into a transportation improvement plan, a TIP, or do we need to get into an economic development SEDS plan in our region before we're going to be able to access resources? If you don't lay out the roadmap, you cannot succeed when a grant solicitation comes out and says, in 59 days from now, this is due. Good luck in thinking about what your priorities are, budgeting, partnering with others. So a resource roadmap is then used as a guide to your local project teams, to your local leadership, to your budget planners. And it's also used to go to your funding patrons, your members of Congress, your state economic development and federal state agency leaders, your federal leaders, and say, we understand what we want to do in this community. We have a roadmap for how to get there. Our next phase on this project is as follows, and you could help us by taking a resource that we've identified that we're eligible for, that matches that need well, and putting it into place in our community to move us forward. I always say that you got to have a briefing sheet to go with it. Your resource roadmap might be 10, 20, 30, I've seen 50-page roadmaps depending on the number of issues and the number of resources you want to line up, but you don't want to give a 40-page document to a state economic development chief or to your member of Congress's chief of staff. They're not going to read a 50-page document. So sum it up in a briefing sheet that lists your priorities, lists the funding that you want to put together, and it will help you move forward. Okay, next slide. I know I'm running out of time too. I just want to refer to you, and you can see URLs at the bottom of the page and the next page I'm going to talk about, but you can also Google up David Lloyd and the US EPA Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization have a page called a Land Revitalization Toolkit with all kinds of resources. I'm going to refer you to 3 because they're relevant to, they adopt the strategy of resource roadmaps. They talk about the federal programs that Toby Rittner and David and I have been talking about, the ones that are already in place. And these are great step-by-step, easy to understand guidebooks for how you can tackle these challenges, not just on brownfields. I think these guidebooks and tools are good for any kind of local revitalization or economic development project or process. They're tried and tool tactics for moving forward. So the first I would just say is community actions that drive brownfield redevelopment. It talks about how you create a consensus vision for reuse, how you remove barriers that keep economic development projects from happening, how you engage the private sector and end users to be part of that vision and part of the action plan, and how you create a resource roadmap to be able to put together the funding and resources to make that happen. So I really encourage that. Fairly new, it's about a 1-year-old project. These other 2 guides are really about leveraging money, about leveraging funds, about leveraging low-cost loans and the kind of finance sources that CDFA helps people understand and use. The first one is called the Leveraging resources for brownfields and community revitalization. That's the one on the right. And it shows different hands coming together to make a project happen. And it is a step-by-step guide on how you identify, seek, secure, and leverage more resources for community revitalization. Highly recommend that toolkit. And then if you want to see some of the programs at the federal level that are in place, that can be used, every 2 years, David Lloyd's team brings out the Brownfields Federal Programs Guide. There's the 2019 Programs Guide. It has more than 30 grants, low-cost loans, tax incentives, and other sources of money and funding that you can use from the federal government to make brownfields and land revitalization work. So you can't start down the road without a roadmap. I encourage you to use it to navigate this challenging and unique situation and time in America. Thank you very much.
We really want to thank all our speakers, Matt Ward, David Lloyd, and Toby Rittner, for their comments. I think it was very aspirational that we could cover such dense and fluid information in an hour, but with over 500 people still on the line. Obviously, this is important information, and we hope you found it very valuable. There are some handouts that Matt referred to in your handout section here. We will also send them out along with a compilation of all the questions. I've reviewed them all. There's some really great questions, some very easy to answer, some that beg a much wider discussion. But in the interest of time, I think we will probably just get to one or two, and then those who need to drop off, we hope you'll listen to the recording or follow up with us through the Q&A compilation that we'll be sending out. Very quickly, and then there's a number of very short ones for you, David. Do you expect a similar amount of money in the next grant round? Obviously, about 65 million was just recently awarded and went to some wonderful projects. What are you anticipating in the next round?
Really, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know precisely. We don't have any indication that it will be different. So yes, we are kind of planning on the grounds that it will be similar funding because it's been fairly steady the last several years. That's our planning approach.
And could you perhaps both just speak momentarily about thoughts on how the CARES Act and what you see in the upcoming federal stimulus package that could impact development investing in projects?
I'll hit that first, Dave.
Well, I'll speak.
Yeah, okay. You go first, Dave.
Okay, go, Matt.
No,
I was just going to say, I think Matt will be able to answer that more carefully because he studied it. But I was so appreciative of your summary, Matt, of the act. I haven't read it. I've just seen some bullets and highlights. But I think there's no way that will not stimulate brownfields redevelopment. I mean, if the funding comes through anywhere close to what Matt said, it's going to spur people to, communities rather, to invest in their brownfields. And I also think his comments on the opportunity zones are spot on. I was skeptical at first, but the opportunity zones are attracting money, private money, to areas that they would normally not go to. So I think we're going to see more of that. And I think the CARES Act is so sweeping. I think there's no way it won't impact. Matt, I want to hear your thoughts though.
Yeah, Dave's right about what he said. I will also say that one of the beautiful things about the EPA Brownfields program is that EPA has always said that brownfields are not an environment-only problem and that it's not an EPA-only issue to help do this. We need to leverage HUD and the Department of Commerce and the Department of Transportation. I could go on and on, a whole federal family of brownfield agencies. That's just at the federal level, let alone state, local, and private sector investment. And so the fact that the CARES Act has $1.5 billion in EDA money, That's 5 times the normal EDA grant. I was pleased to be there when the EDA administrator and EPA administrator signed a memorandum of agreement years ago saying EDA is going to invest in brownfields. So that federal family of brownfield resources, there's a lot of that in the CARES Act. I will say, and it's proper, that the CARES Act does tie a lot of the use of that funding to virus response. So a lot of grants say, tell us how this fire department was specifically impacted by virus response needs and how this new FEMA Assistance to Firefighters grant resource will help you, address that need. That's proper because virus response is our immediate concern. I do think that pieces of the CARES Act and certainly pieces of the economic stimulus bills are going to be more focused on rebuilding communities in the economy and not just buying PPE and sanitation. That's why you need a resource roadmap now.
Thank you. We're going to close down the webinar now. I just need 2 more minutes for announcements. First, remember to complete the survey where you'll have an opportunity to make a contribution to support CClear. We strive to make our services accessible to all, and a $25 donation now helps make that possible. I also want to make sure that each of you know about the National Brownfields Coalition, which is a nonpartisan allegiance of organizations and private and public sector professionals who develop and advocate for policies and practices that support the responsible cleanup and of underutilized and environmentally impacted land. The coalition is co-led by Smart Growth America and CClear, and please follow the link there to sign up to join our mailing list. Next slide, we look forward to staying in touch with you, so we'll hope you'll join us on our upcoming webinars on May 21st for Women Innovators in Redevelopment, and again on May 28th for PFAS, slippery slope or manageable risk for property transactions and redevelopment. Next slide. And here's our contact information of CClear's senior team. We are bi-coastal with our executive director and director of programs in California, and myself and my colleague Claire Weston here in the New York, New Jersey area. So please be in touch with us if you have any questions. We look forward to hearing from you. And we really thank you for staying with us a little longer than we'd anticipated, but with the information so rich. And again, we thank all 3 speakers, and we will get back to you with outstanding questions. So stay well and be in touch.